Speaking of needing more love in this world, and in this case, more self-love, I would like to introduce our next speaker for the day, Ms. Kalpalatha Thiagarajan, with her session topic, The Power of Self-Hypnosis and Self-Healing. Ms. Kalpalatha possesses a master's in professional counseling and a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy. She specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, and brain spotting. In her private practice, she largely focuses on anger management, behavioral, relational, and self-esteem issues, to name a few. She has had experiences working with families, corporate settings, prisons, and has also conducted training and counseling sessions at various community settings. Her extensive area of work and observation would surely help us in drawing a clearer perspective on how people from various walks of life, especially citizens of Singapore, have adapted and adjusted their mental health to survive and endure the pandemic under the guidance of Ms. Kalpalatha. On to you.
Thank you very much, Tanisha, for that beautiful, very generous introduction. A very good afternoon to everyone from Singapore. Feeling very privileged to be part of this virtual conference, and a personal thanks to Sheila Menon for making me part of the conference and inviting me to speak today. I will be presenting a case study, so let me first share the screen. Okay. All right. Well, it's a lazy Sunday afternoon, so I've included some jazzy animations to keep us all awake. So this will be a case study with a very recent client I had over the last year. And I've used a few therapies. The major ones were CBT and clinical hypnotherapy as well. So the client suffered from OCD, and I just thought we'll have a broad overview of how the categorization of OCD is under the present DSM-5. It used to be under anxiety disorders before with DSM-4, and with DSM-5, they have a separate category under obsessive, compulsive, and related disorders. And under that comes OCD and a few other obsessional compulsion related disorders. So the difference between this and the previous categorization mainly comes from the fact that the fundamental features of this particular disorder is more obsessions and compulsions, and anxiety is more of a comorbidity that is present, and it occurs more often, but the main focus is on the obsessions and compulsions. So under OCD, the diagnostic features are it has to have a presence of obsessions, compulsions, or both. And again, they need to be time consuming, at least an hour a day, where the client, or rather the patient diagnosed with OCD is consumed with their obsessions and compulsions. And again, the symptoms are not attributable to any other substance abuse or any other comorbid medical conditions. And the symptoms not, again, explainable by any other mental disorder like general anxiety disorder or any other anxiety disorders like a panic disorder. Now, we'll go into the obsessions a little more into it. According to the DSM-5, they have to be recurrent, very persistent, and any attempts to ignore, suppress, or neutralize these obsessions has to be done with the compulsive behavior. Again, the compulsive behaviors may be a few broad categories like cleaning, counting, or habitual thoughts negative thoughts, ruminations. It can also be a mental act, uh, and also to do with taboo or prohibited thoughts, but they need to be a response to the obsessions. Again, they brought up specifiers in DSM-5. A person needs to have a fairly good insight. Insight meaning, for example, if a person has a checking obsession, then say for if the person tends to check if the door is locked, if the stove is closed, say 30 times, then they may believe that the house may not burn down. Probably no calamity will happen if I don't check for 30 times. And that's a fairly good insight. A poor insight would be if I do not check at least 30 times, then probably the house may burn down. There's a possibility of that happening. And an absent insight would be the house would definitely burn down, even if I check for 30 times. So I need to keep doing it more and more and more. Other specifiers are tick related. A lot of times we see the males, especially if there's an early onset of OCD, they seem to have a tick related disorder as well. And dysfunctional beliefs, the belief that the obsession, the obsessive thoughts they have are completely real, which means they have an absent insight or a delusional disbelief that it, it is the truth, and no matter what reasoning people around them do with them, they're not willing to entertain it. They're not willing to even discuss or explore the possibility that possibly it's not true. There's no point in checking if the stove is closed or if the house is locked or unlocked. You can check it twice, but beyond that is is really not a reasonable behavior. So they very strongly believe in their obsessions, and they very strongly perform their compulsions as well. So coming on to the particular client right here, uh, she's of Indian origin and 26 years old, unmarried, no boyfriend, a fairly average student. She has a diploma and she found work in a local university. She has been working there for the last 4 years. And actually, under medication since December 2019 for OCD and kleptophobia. Her specific obsessions were surrounding kleptophobia. She was very worried that she might rob or she may have, pickpocketed something from a shop or from the person standing in front of her or around her. And she was actually diagnosed 4 years ago on and off medication. And finally, she was institutionalized for a while, and more regulated, medicated uh, treatment went on since 2019. The counseling period started last year, 2020, with April, and almost continued to the end of the year. It was completely done through Zoom because there was a lockdown at that point, and she also felt very uncomfortable stepping out at any point. So until the very last session when I saw her in person, all the sessions held once a week throughout from April to December were held on Zoom. Looking at her family dynamics, she was extremely close to her mother, who was a heart patient. Father worked in a local supermarket here. Again, the sister was divorced. If you see the family dynamics, again, it also contributed a lot towards her developing OCD. She was the only other child in the house who did not have a problem, in the sense she was not married, she didn't have any marital issues or relationship issues, and largely she took it upon herself to maintain the financial stability and the emotional stability of this family. The mother was sort of shouldering the family responsibility for a major part of the time until she was diagnosed with cardiac issues. And since then, the girl developed this sense of, responsibility that she has to take over and she has to be the sole breadwinner. She has to be there for the family and for every member of the family as well. So looking at the case formulation, I went with the CBT, and I also included Asen Aladdin's cognitive hypnotherapy case formulative factors. So you can see the predisposing factors, precipitating factors, and the protective factors. Again, she assumed a more parental role towards the mother since the mother became a patient. The father, mid-year last year, lost his job, and she ended up being the sole breadwinner of the family. So this overarching burden that she has to, sort of be there and be strong for the family actually led to more anxiety and more stress in this case. A very rigid understanding that if she fails, the whole family will perish and disaster will fall upon them, and there's absolutely no one but her to shoulder this responsibility, even though the sister was actually working and the mother was doing a part-time job. It did not make any impact on her. The precipitating factors were significant levels of distress, thinking about her role and her responsibilities that she's taken up. A lot of obsessions and compulsions because for the last 4 years, she had been in and out of hospitals. She had been to several therapists, and she was very convinced that nothing can help, no one can help, and she is sort of a lost case. A lot of racing thoughts, one leading to another. Again, her obsessions were around kleptophobia, robbing, or fear of robbing people, fear of shoplifting. And so she would have this a train of thoughts saying she probably did shoplift, leading to an arrest, leading to her mother getting to know about it and having a massive attack and passing on, and then her father becoming more sick, and then her sister and her niece being all alone and left defenseless while she is in jail. So there were a lot of thought catastrophizing going on surrounding her obsessions. The perpetuating factors were that she did not receive uh, much help from the therapists or the doctors that she was seeing until last year, and increasing anxiety as a result of that. There were a lot of negative self statements, thinking that I am a failure, I'm a lost case, I have no hope, and I will never get rid of OCD for the rest of my life. But her protective factors were there. We identified that she was very religious, and that helped holding on to some beliefs that God is there, God will help. Uh, and she was very strongly committed to therapy, largely this was sort of a last resort for her. And there was nothing much to do also during the lockdown. So she was completely committed to turning up in time and not missing a single session. She's very, very motivated, again, because of the understanding of how responsible she has to be towards her family. And she's extremely, extremely close to her mother. So all the more for her to sort of prove to her mother that she can overcome this. She's stronger than she looks and she's stronger than she behaves. And that sort of kept her going throughout. Psychological symptoms, interpersonal difficulty, psychological symptoms were with cognitive distortions, catastrophizing, her core beliefs that she's a failure, she's not worthy, interpersonal difficulties where she had absolutely no friends, she was not close to anyone beyond her mother, occupational problems were, it was largely a desk job, and she had to commute to work thrice a week, even during lockdown. And it gave her a lot more stress and anxiety, thinking she might get arrested anytime with her shoplifting obsessive thoughts. Schemas, again, had to do with her opinion, her view of herself, of how she is, who she is, of how the world looks at her, of how her immediate relations view her, and her mental issues. The negative self-hypnosis were a lot of these racing thoughts that I mentioned earlier. I'm racing a bit because I have a lot to cover, and I'm very aware of the time limit. Okay, we came up with what are her obsessions and compulsions. I got her to list all of that down. So as you can see, she feels the thoughts coming up when she travels, and even sitting in her own home. If she faces the front door, she feels somehow she would have stolen from the passers-by. So she used to sit away from the door. She used to feel very vulnerable if she didn't have her laptop or her phone with her. Um, and she would imagine the consequences of shoplifting. She would listen to music at a very, very loud volume. She would have a lot of compulsive behaviors, repeatedly checking, and a rigid way of putting everything for wash, and a rigid, elaborate cleaning procedure every time she steps out of the house, even to go to the mini mart below the HDB block. Okay, then I gave her an OCD hierarchy form, and she came up with these situations, and she ranked the distress for each situation from 0 to 100. If you could see, there was a lot of worry about not being able to pay the bill if at all she's caught shoplifting, and also not being able to call her family if she does get arrested as a result of that. And again, it was all around having no money to little money, having her handphone with no charge in her handphone. And she didn't, in reality, have much money to spend. And she did mention that she always felt attracted to the little trinkets, the small sweets, the little souvenirs, the little makeup items that are usually displayed on the counter in small shops. So all her obsessions were related to that situation. So we did a few interventions with her. I did CBT primarily with psychotherapy. So there was a lot of addressing her negative automatic thoughts, her catastrophizing tendencies, her black or white kind of a thinking, saying either it's always going to be a disaster, and there are no two ways about it. Uh, she was already taking medication from her psychiatrist, so that was more regularized, and we did quite a few relaxation techniques together. I introduced mindfulness as well for her to be more aware and more to be present rather than get drawn into her obsessive thoughts and her racing thoughts as well. Quite a few hypnotic techniques were also used and introduced to her for her to be able to do it herself in the maintenance phase. We will go through it one by one. Again, as I said, ERP, exposure and response prevention, is mainly a very popular time-tested choice under CBT for obsessional compulsive disorder. So we dealt with her problematic thoughts. I gave her the basic CBT triangle, where the thoughts affect the behaviors and emotions, and there's a cycle. So we tried breaking her behavior, which was the easiest to tackle and handle at the point. So we looked at the association between the sensation it brought, the obsessions the obsessional thoughts and how it brought the distress in. And using mindfulness, she was able to also make that association and identify when it occurred. There was also an association identified between her compulsions, which is carrying out her ritualistic behavior, and which supposedly is supposed to decrease the distress, but again kept bringing it back every time she indulged in that compulsive behavior. In vivo exposure could not be done being a lockdown, so it was largely imaginary, and that was done a lot using hypnotherapy, and ritual prevention was also done using a lot of the hypnosis techniques. As I said, she was under medication, antidepressants. Um, she was very afraid of taking it. She was not very regular, but with the Zoom sessions and regular weekly once sessions, we were able to make sure that she had a diary and she would note down every time she missed, and she would report to the doctor as well. She was very, very committed to therapy. So this time she was very committed to taking her medications, very committed to also practicing all the suggestions and interventions given to her. Okay, coming to the main part here, hypnotherapy techniques. I used a lot of ego strengthening with her, and she was very open to hypnosis. Uh, she was quite susceptible to suggestions as well, and we did identify her safe place of relaxation, which was her mosque, and she gave me very specific details. So this was also again used for self hypnosis. Uh, she would take herself off to the mosque every time she felt her anxiety rise. And she also did progressive muscle relaxation twice a day. She would do it once in the morning. She would do it again to help her sleep at night. The morning exercise helped her to be more calm, to sort of go about her days without much of a disruption because of her rising anxiety. And every time she felt the anxiety come up, she would either, if she had the time, she would do the safe place, or she would go into a quiet corner and do some breathing techniques that we taught her. Mindfulness was mostly used to keep her more grounded, to keep her more in the present. And ego strengthening was done, in fact, with every Zoom session we had. We did a little bit at least of ego strengthening, and it largely helped to bring back her confidence and to be more committed to therapy as well. Specific techniques that I used with the control room of the mind, because every time she had her racing thoughts, so we identified specific levers and wheels that controlled her racing thoughts, controlled her stress, controlled her compulsions, and she took great pleasure in going into the control room and bringing it down. And she reported, she had elaborate reports on how it helped her to control her impulses, control her thoughts. And we did a systematic desensitization using the OCD hierarchy. Every time we would take one from the list that she created, and we were able to go through the entire list she had. Again, pseudo orientation helped largely because she was very unsure initially of how she would be, and after therapy, what would be the case, and if she would need therapy lifelong. So it largely helped in her looking at herself at a future time where she was completely free of OCD and she was able to go back to a normal life, because that was her goal, to go back to how she was before she was diagnosed with OCD. And so she imagined herself with her own family, and also being able to support her mother, and her mother being very proud of her. All this largely helped with bringing the interventions and having significant difference, significant effect of the interventions throughout the sessions. We did install some anchors because during the lockdown, she was still able to go down to the mini mart downstairs. So the minute she entered the approach to the mini mart. The minute she saw the name or the name board of the mini mart, that I used that as an anchor, and she would touch herself, and then she would get into this relaxed response. Direct suggestions would immediately get activated, and she would tell herself that she is going to do this without anxiety. She would be able to go in, buy what she wants, and come out without any negative incident. A lot of direct suggestions were pegged to the anchors, and she was able to largely use it. The distraction techniques, where if at any time she caught herself with her obsessions, with the racing thoughts, she would immediately use a stop technique, STOP. It basically was introduced through the ego strengthening time and during her pseudo orientation as well. uh, Direct suggestions were given to her to activate the stop technique. Basically, S stands for stop what you're doing, what you're thinking, and take note of where you are. Come back to the present, ground yourself. T was take note of everything around you, and understand where you are, and understand that you have not taken anything. And O is observe your own heartbeat, observe, and if it is too fast, bring it down. Do some deep breathing immediately before you proceed. P is for proceed, before you proceed with any action, which would be to continue with her shopping, or if she felt safer, she had a decision to take there. If she felt safer to exit the shop and come back and try the whole sequence all over again when she felt more in control. As I said, there were very, very significant results. She was even able to step out for exercise. She did a lot of walking. We introduced mindful walking to her. And gradually, she was able to have a very fulfilling lifestyle. She was able to go out, take her mother out, do some grocery shopping for the family. Uh, and it was so significant that she actually ended up securing a promotion, and she was able to realize her dreams of going on for further education, and being able to actually step out again, go to the university, do the necessary application process, and still she was able to juggle her work without rising, without increased anxiety, without increased stress. And finally, she did come and meet me in person at the end of the year, towards the end, and she was very, very grateful and very happy. She told me that the self hypnosis worked a lot, especially pseudo orientation in time and control room of the mind as well. And she does it regularly all by herself during her self hypnosis sessions. Um, as I said, I'm not sure how much time I have. Can anyone?
You have about 2 minutes.
Wow. Okay. So that brings me almost to the end. Again, there was not much result that she saw with just the medication alone, and the counseling she received at the general hospitals here did not also help. Uh, so it was really a very significant case for me as well, because again, during the COVID, it was completely over Zoom. Hypnotherapy worked great. CBT also worked very well. I was able to, transfer all the suggestions with great success, I should say. And it also allowed for a very safe method to be able to flood the client with the OCD hierarchy that she had, and also be able to take her to a safe place very successfully every time she had increased anxiety. So there it is, the willingness of the client and her persistent applications of all the hypnosis procedures, her willingness to fill up all the CBT worksheets I kept sending her, largely contributed to the success of the therapy. So that is it. Any questions? It was a very rushed session, but I hope I covered all the main points that you were expecting to see in the case study.
Hi, Ms. Kalpalatha. I think I agree with our participants who said that that was such a comprehensive sharing. And I think, the fact that you've walked us through that it was a really wonderful sharing. And actually, there are lots of good questions here. I'll try to see with the given time, we'll try to address them. Okay. The first being, was ego strengthening focus on getting her to calm down? Or did you use that also for the kleptophobia?
Ego strengthening was mostly used in the initial Zoom sessions for her to sort of calm down and get into a more conducive mental state, to sort of open her up for the therapy, for the main therapy. And she used it thereafter every time she had the kleptophobic thoughts coming up, which are the obsessions. She did use it on herself when she was taught self hypnosis. She did.
I know you mentioned this, but would you agree that self-hypnosis, because there's some questions here asking what was the main, because you've got you've planned it really well, and there was a mix of a lot of therapies would you say there's one that stands out, one method, or what would you say is the most important?
I would say cognitive behavioral hypnotherapy.
Okay. All right. And one last bit here. There were a lot of homework. There were a lot of activities given to this particular client. And how did you provide them? Was it done gradually, or how did you do manage the?
Very outset, as I always do with all my clients, I give them a clear understanding of how the sessions will pan out. So it's a very interactive session, and I will be giving them homework, worksheets to fill out, and things to try, exercises to try. And so she was sort of primed for that. And I introduced it under the ego strengthening exercise as well. So she was very open. And every week I would share a few worksheets with her. She would send it back to me by email, and that would go on. She would also send me WhatsApp messages throughout the week, because we met once a week without fail from April to December. And she would update me on how the self hypnosis went on, how the stop technique went on, how she was trying to do the control room of the mind all by herself. And she gave me a lot of inputs. Again, because of the lockdown, she didn't have much to do. I did, and I was stuck at home as well. So it was a very it was a very good thing, actually. Lockdown worked out very well for both of us with this client.
Thank you so much for the sharing. I believe we really benefited because you walked us through the whole process. Okay, I'm going to pass it back to Tanusha now. Thank you, Kalpalatha.